Welcome to the ATP Project. You're with your hosts, Steve, Jeff, and Elisma. How are you?
Great.
Very good.
Good to have you back on.
Yes.
Today we're going to be talking about IBS, histamine, and its relation to the gut, and some interesting research that's sort of coming up around polyphenols, modbiotics. It's funny, my son and I suffer terribly from histamine reactions. In fact, my son sometimes just gets into these sneezing fits and he just can't stop. If I go anywhere near a cat, I am highly allergic to cats, and it's just like, sneezing all the
And
time.
that's where people relate histamine to. They go, the drugs that are antihistamines, it's a runny nose thing. It's when you've got a cold or flu or something, or particularly allergies, because histamine's released when IgE antibodies bind to mast cells, degranulate, and you release this histamine, which causes vasodilation, and then you get the mucus and get rid of the allergen.
It's a flushing reaction, right? It's designed to get rid of the pollen. It's designed to get rid of the, what am I looking for? The intruder. Whatever it is, the foreign particle that's there,
the
right?
border patrol, essentially, of the immune system. And so when you get an injury or anything like that, I mean, what you experience is the redness and the hotness and the pain, and that's what histamine does. And it does so in order to get immune cells and cells to that area to repair it. So,
well, and we'll get into IBS in a minute, but while we're talking about histamine reactions, what are some other ones? Because cats, pollen, I mean, you see the ads come up for the certain antihistamines, or it's that time of year, and people picking up cats and people running and frolicking and cut grass and all the rest of it. What is there anything else? I mean, again, you got the puffy eyes, you got the normally the clear snot that comes out. I mean, sorry to be a bit graphic here, but what else? Redness, flushing. What else? What else can you feel?
You get fatigued. Because histamine is a classic regulator of being awake and asleep.
Oh, okay.
In fact, if you went to a pharmacist now and got a sleeping tablet from the pharmacy, it would be an antihistamine.
Oh, and oftentimes you see that causes drowsiness to not operate, machinery and stuff like that.
It depletes histamine from your brain. So histamine, we pick on it, but it's also got a function.
Of course.
It's like in fact, what Elisma pointed out correctly is that it increases vasodilation to get immune cells around the body.
And it's interesting because I've heard, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I did hear from somebody who was popping a histamine virtually every day, like for years. And he went and saw somebody, became infertile, and they believed that there was a link. Now, I hadn't heard that before.
There is a link.
There is a link.
There is a link.
Okay.
Don't want to give too much away because we've researched a lot into that. But histamine has a tremendous role in fertility.
Wow.
And pregnancy.
Wow.
And all of that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
because you've recently written a book, Elisma. Is this part of what you've kind of been looking at?
Yeah, but this is second book.
Oh, this is another one. I don't want to get too far.
But you're absolutely right. Like histamine has a huge role to play in fertility.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm fascinated by science because a lot of people go, look, that time of the pollen's out, I'm going to reach for my favourite antihistamine. Some people go, that really helps. I feel normal, so therefore I'm just going to keep doing it. Yeah, this, as we say,
everything has consequences.
What is the piper to pay? There's always a piper to pay. Except many times in nature there is not. Sometimes there is a net positive and a benefit when nature knows best. And this is, again, I think sometimes we try and get too smart. Yeah. All right, anything else before histamine? And then we want to do a quick summary on IBS, which is also very, very topical.
Yeah, we're going to talk about histamine, what it does in the gut. People know its nose thing. Yeah. But what about its gut thing? And there's an incredible amount of research.
So is that the relation to IBS? Is that a potential co-factor?
There is a relationship, between histamine and IBS symptoms,
Wow.
So because what we've described, is systemic histamine, the runny eyes, the runny nose, the eczema, the flushing, that's all systemic histamine. But then you get what we call, gut histamine or external histamine, if you wish, which actually has a slightly different not a different mechanism, but a different way of being broken down or metabolized. What can happen with a lot of people, though, is that if they have high gut histamine and they have gut problems and they have leaky gut, then that histamine, or they can't break it down properly, that histamine can leak from the gut into the bloodstream and then cause some of those systemic symptoms as well, like the runny nose and the flushing and the runny eyes and all of those kinds of things, which is why sometimes foods, some people, they'll eat a food and and then they get sinus issues, right? Or their eczema flares up. And that's when the gut histamine has moved into the bloodstream and now cause systemic symptoms.
Okay, I'm going to ask a stupid question because I don't know. So if I drink milk, I get very snotty. Is that a histamine?
Yeah, I mean, histamine does originate in the gut, Elizabeth said. And there's a paper here titled, ready for this one, Histamine Intolerance Originates in the Gut.
There you go.
Yeah, so you know, in the old days of naturopathy in the 90s when I was training, we used to just call it mucus-producing foods. We didn't really have a mechanism of action. But certainly if you've got, you know, bad gut bugs or different gut bugs, or you're allergic to something and it causes reaction, absolutely histamine does originate in the gut, and it's due to dysbiosis in the gut too, largely.
Right.
So there's a whole area of research there, and Elizabeth knows way more than I do because she's written books on it and researched it to the nth hill. So it's quite incredible. But you know, histamine in the gut, you need a little bit there, just to keep motility going. Yeah. So antihistamines cause constipation. That's one of the side effects.
Right. Okay.
So it just wipes out histamine. We don't want to wipe it out. We just want to regulate it.
Yeah.
Well, that's where it becomes important, right? The importance here is, like, as Steve pointed out, and also as you've pointed out, Jeff, is that histamine has a role to play. It's actually quite important on which cells it binds to. Will depend on what role it plays. So if histamine binds to the enterochromaffin-like cells. Enterochromaffin-like cells. They're the cells in your stomach that stimulates stomach acid production. So you need histamine to bind to those cells to produce stomach acid to digest your food. But if histamine binds to mast cells in the gut, then that will trigger an immune reaction.
So
right?
what are mast cells and what are they for?
Well, mast cells are they're one of the immune cells. They make histamine as well as a whole bunch of other stuff, and they sit around the borders of our body. So the borders would be all your mucous membranes. It would be your blood-brain barrier. It would be your stomach lining. It would be your sinuses. It'll be the lungs. It'll be even along the skin, and they like the first guys who detect, I guess, danger or something that shouldn't be there, and then they'll release histamine. They'll pop like balloons, and they'll release histamine, and that histamine tells all the other immune cells, "Hey guys, we've got someone here. You gotta come and help." You're like, "There's an intruder here." So it recruits all the other immune cells, and then you get an immune reaction. You get inflammation and an immune reaction. Yeah. So it really depends on where histamine binds to. If it binds to the enterochromaffin cells, you produce stomach acid. If it binds to the mast cells, you get inflammation and immune response. So if you take an antihistamine, depending on the type of antihistamine and the type of receptor it binds to, you may stop your mast cells, you may stop the immune response and the inflammation, but you could also stop the stomach acid production. Okay. And then you end up, as Steve pointed out, constipation and all kinds of other
indigestion, fermenting, it's bad.
So, and while we're on it, and if you can't talk about it, say, first rule of testosterone club is we can't talk about it, but how does it affect testosterone? Like, how does it... Do you understand? Is it an understood or known pathway?
Well, I don't know the exact link between, if there's an exact link between histamine and testosterone, but there is a link between histamine and estrogen, which can then, I guess, skew the balance of estrogen and testosterone in males. Right. So estrogen will cause mast cells to produce more histamine, but histamine causes it makes more estrogen. So it triggers the body to make more estrogen. So it's like a vicious circle. Estrogen makes more histamine, histamine makes more estrogen. Right. So we can end up with, at least in females, I know it definitely increases estrogen levels. I'm going to assume it may work very similarly in males as well.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine. Now, there could have been correlation and causation as two different things, and we speak about that all the time, Steve-O. But this person trying to get pregnant, couldn't get the wife pregnant. One of the contributing things that he spoke about with his healthcare practitioner was the fact that he had been using consistently antihistamines and found out that his sperm count was extremely low, virtually non-existent. Wow. Now, it might not have been, but just my understanding is that there was a conversation that there was potentially a link between the antihistamine and the infertility. So, okay, interesting.
Interesting, eh?
So IBS. So in terms of, do we want to unpack that a little bit more?
Well, IBS, for those people that don't know, is irritable bowel syndrome.
Do you know what percentage of the population are affected by that?
Oh,
Steve?
no, but well, there's 20% of people with severe gastrointestinal distress. I've just got the paper here, 20% of the population.
Wow.
And histamine intolerance and IBS is quite huge. And IBS is a weird one because it's not, you can constipate or you can get diarrhea. It's brought on by stress.
Well, and this is where you hear sometimes the traditional paths of medicine almost say, well, it's almost like chronic fatigue. It doesn't really exist because there's not one particular symptom.
Yeah, like ulcerative colitis, you can tell. You can see, oh, look at the ulcers on the colon. And then you got the Crohn's disease. You can see, oh, the ileum's affected. Look at the inflammation there. But IBS is just this weird. It used to be like a basket diagnosis. Like we don't know. It's just sort of like a
your gut's
IBS.
Dysregulated, so you've got IBS. You know, don't really know what's going on, but that's kind of like what's going on there. I mean, there's like certain species that they found, like certain gut bacterial species that seems to be, if they're in low levels, it puts people more at risk of developing irritable bowel syndrome.
But like, which ones are they for people who are in the know? And how would you, if you had IBS, what would you do? Would you try and increase these, I'd imagine?
Yeah. So the species is Doribacter splanknicus. And this, they found to be quite in low levels in people with IBS.
Yep.
And so the suggestion there is that if you increase those species, then it'll help and protect against getting something like IBS.
If you have it, can it help to alleviate the symptoms? Do you know?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
There's a correlation there. We don't know if there's a causation, but interestingly, there's certain things in plants called polyphenols which can increase this guy.
Yep.
So there's and polyphenols are found in healthy foods anyway, typically.
Yeah.
So eating healthy foods is going to be good for your gut. We kind of know that, but polyphenols we know increase this species. So there's scope for more research that we need there, but certainly polyphenols can help the microbiome anyway in the gut in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, but that seems to be the hypothesis, that polyphenols can increase the species.
Yep.
And then if the species is in more modified levels where they should be, then your risk of developing IBS is much, much lower.
So if you had a patient with IBS, what would you recommend that they take or eat? What polyphenols should they? Is there anything in particular, specific?
Well, it's hard to say because a lot of where the beneficial polyphenols are is they sit in sort of like the husks of plants and the peels and things like that, right?
Yeah.
So I guess what I would say to people is don't peel your vegetables and don't peel your fruits, right?
Yeah.
So as much as you can. Obviously, I'm not suggesting people eat banana peels and pomegranate husks and stuff like that.
But that's the kind of thing. And again, we've looked into that and we understand obviously the science around that, which is where obviously the modbiotic, sort of compounds are very beneficial.
Very beneficial. Yeah, absolutely. Because inside the gut, we talked about histamine before, but you've got this enzyme in your gut called diamine oxidase, and that's an enzyme that breaks down histamine, and that's produced from certain gut bugs. So there's another paper here that the title kind of says it all. It says intestinal dysbiosis in patients with histamine intolerance. And this histamine intolerance fits into an IBS type, because you remember IBS has not got ABC. It's kind of a very weird kind of diagnosis. Very difficult to diagnose it, in fact.
Yeah.
So what's traditional treatments at the moment? If somebody went to their doctor, do you know what they're currently saying to them in terms of how to treat, IBS?
There's one treatment they're using, fluoxetine.
Oh, okay.
An antidepressant.
Wow.
I won't give the brand name away, but it's a very, very common one.
Yeah.
Probably the most common one you've ever heard of.
And why are they using that?
Because it boosts serotonin levels in the gut.
Funny. It all comes back down to this bloody serotonin, right?
Yeah. Well, the bloody serotonin is really important in the gut, not just the brain. And if you're stressed, stress depletes serotonin.
Yeah.
So if you I don't know if you've ever heard people, and I don't want to say it on camera, but they eat themselves.
Crap themselves.
That's it. That's a better way to.
Yep.
Well, that's because the stress
Such
response.
a potty mouth, Steve.
I'm just trying to. Well, we have to talk about bowels. You know, naturopaths love this stuff.
Yeah.
And so serotonin is depleted in the gut, and you get massive changes in your gut. So one of the treatments is fluoxetine, which increases serotonin levels in the body and the brain.
Right. Okay.
It has side effects.
And what's I was going to say? What's the piper to pay?
The worst one. Stuff all the other stuff. Impotence.
Oof.
That's the worst one.
That's terrible.
What about impotence?
Fluoxetine.
Fluoxetine causes impotence.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my.
Yeah, I know. That's the worst one.
Nobody wants that.
Nobody wants that.
No.
And it's like in about 50% of men who take this.
So it's an
drug.
antidepressant, and then you get impotent.
And they become depressed.
Then you get really depressed.
Yeah, it's bad. And you got to, for certain disorders, you don't just take one tablet, you can take up to 3, which is a huge dose. And, has other side effects, but that's the worst one.
Yeah. All right. So what else?
All right. They're often told to get rid of all the allergic, even doctors, get rid of all the allergic foods, but also stress.
Right.
So the other treatment becomes benzodiazepines.
Right.
Which is a class of drugs that reduce stress and sedate you a bit. So there's that class of drugs too, which are not great drugs. Diazepam, anything with Pam on the end of it, is not one you want to be taking long term. Yeah, so any of those benzos, and they're terrible long term, but they're used for anti-stress things. So if you can think of the drugs that reduce your stress levels and help you sleep, the class of drugs called the benzodiazepines. So they're treating the stress response because the stress has been intimately linked with IBS. So I don't like those treatments because I don't think they're addressing, you're not deficient in benzodiazepine.
No, you're not really treating the root cause.
No.
And another treatment that some practitioners may use would be antihistamines, because if histamine binds to, they've linked histamine binding to H1 and H2 receptors. These are just histamine receptors. So H1 is histamine 1 receptor, H2 is histamine 2 receptor.
Yep.
And these receptors sit on cells. They're like, I like to call them like hungry hippos.
Right.
Like hippos. And then they go bind on the balls, and the balls would be, in this case, histamine, but it could be insulin or whatever, depending on the receptor. So when histamine binds to receptors, then an action kind of like happens. So when histamine binds to H1 histamine receptors, then generally mast cells will release more histamine. You get inflammation in the gut, right? Which is associated with IBS as well. Usually there's like lots of inflammation and pain and stuff like that. And then if histamine binds to H2 histamine receptors, it actually allows more water to go into the gut, which then can trigger the diarrhea effect, for instance, that you get with more a diarrhea, side
dominant one
of IBS. And so there could be practitioners who would use H1 or H2 blockers to help and manage IBS symptoms. But as we mentioned earlier, that's great short term, but if you use that long term, then eventually it can start interfering with stomach acid production, digestion, nutrient absorption, and things like that.
What percentage of people that you would see in clinic are suffering from IBS and or histamine sort of issues?
Well, histamine,
massive,
huge.
right? Yeah.
Like the thing with histamine is it's such a broad range of symptoms. Like most people just think of histamine as the sinuses and the allergies.
Yeah, I do.
And it's way more than that. Like, histamine intolerance is associated with vertigo, travel sickness, nausea, headaches. In terms of digestion, typically you'd get sort of like the leaky gut syndrome, stomach cramps. So it's a really wide variety of symptoms. And in the histamine workbook that we wrote, we outline those symptoms very, very specifically in all the different areas, and kind of like also what causes them. So there's a wide variety of symptoms. I'd say easily, if I had to give it a percentage, I think 80% of people have some form of histamine intolerant symptoms. And look, that's expected because the people that as practitioners see generally all have inflammation.
Sure.
And histamine is part of that inflammatory response. It's part of the immune response. So every practitioner, every patient would have some form of histamine stuff going on. It just depends on, is this a big part of that person's problem or is it a small part? And I guess I'm starting to see more and more things that are related to histamine that I previously wouldn't have associated with histamine, just because I understand the mechanisms now a lot better in terms of what triggers histamine release, what we need to break it down, and so many people have issues around that. And so then they end up with this uncontrolled immune response and uncontrolled inflammation in the gut, but also in other parts of the body as well, like the brain, et cetera, et cetera.
Can I give you all this inflammation, and you talk about practitioners before, if you went to a doctor and you had a lot of inflammation, they would tend to give you anti-inflammatories. And guess what? That increases histamine in the gut dramatically.
Yes,
Right.
it
What
does.
a vicious cycle.
Oh, and not only that, but aspirin increases histamine in the gut dramatically.
Right.
So if you have, because that's a very common analgesic, isn't it?
Sure.
It's probably one of the more common in the world.
Yeah.
And ibuprofen does it too.
You know how it does it?
Yeah. So it decreases the enzyme that breaks down histamine in the gut.
Wow.
So if you're getting these, I mean, I've got a list of the medications here. They go on as long as my arm. But even if you get taken, you're going to love this one, synthetic ascorbic acid.
Really?
That alters,
Wow.
your DAO levels, which is the enzyme that breaks down histamine.
Right.
So, thiamine, high-dose thiamine, it's vitamin B1. So, all those common drugs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, of course, all the morphines and all the opioids, that changes it too. So it's going to be almost everybody. You said 80%, that'd be
That's
true.
right.
Because,
so some of those medications interfere with the breakdown of histamine, and then some of those medications will make mast cells release more histamine.
Yes.
So it's like a double whammy kind of thing that you can often get.
Screws with the gut. The most common side effects of the NSAIDs, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, is gastrointestinal problems. And this is largely due to the alterations of histamine in the gut.
So as naturopaths then, what would be your advice in terms of diet, what you should and shouldn't eat? Because I'd imagine that would have an impact. And then what sort of natural compounds and or medicines would you sort of recommend?
Well, the biggest, I guess, in terms of foods and things like that is, and then I want to make this clear, like everyone has a level of histamine they can tolerate.
Sure.
For some, it may be, it may be a lot more than for other people, depending on their genetics and the state of their gut health and all of that. But all of us will eventually get histamine symptoms if we have too much. The biggest ones would be alcohol, big histamine thing, or histamine food. Fish can be very, very high histamine.
Really?
Yeah, fish is, especially canned fish. The fresher the fish, the better.
Right.
So the fresher the fish, the less histamine it'll have.
Sure.
But canned fish would generally have a lot more histamine. And then, I guess the rule of thumb is aged foods. And when we talk about aged foods, think about foods that have been aged, like cheese.
Right.
Cheese have been aged.
Yep.
Sauerkraut has been aged.
Yep.
Fermented foods have been aged. In a way, alcohol has been aged. Wine has been aged, right? Leftover foods that stays in the fridge for too long is aged foods. Fruits that become overripe is aged fruits. So the fresher the food, the less histamine. The older the food, the more histamine.
Let me ask you something a bit different, bit out of left field. So we know that with regards to, green harvesting, gas ripening, and the storage that they do, and this is made every few years they troll this out again, and you see people cracking up about, grocery, about apples that are literally 12 months old.
Yep.
Do we have any data or any information in terms of how much that ages the food? Because surely, if it's in stasis, but I know that might just prevent it from rotting, but the other chemical issues, they might not all be put into stasis. Because do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I guess, I'd like to hear Steve's opinion, but from my understanding is that what they do is they stop the enzyme or the enzymatic degradation in these foods. Now, I guess I would say that I think the production of histamine, my understanding, is more the bacteria in food that starts to break the food down. So if you look at like when the food starts to smell or they start to brown, then there'll be high histamine. My guess would be that if we talk about where they freeze the food in time, if you wish, because they stop the enzyme production, I don't think that will necessarily increase the histamine production.
I found the highest food that I found in histamine, which is the one I found, was the highest was 2,200 micrograms per litre, and that was red wine.
Wow!
So you can see how that's aged at room temperature and it sits around and that sort of stuff.
Actually, you know what? It's kind of funny. If I'm a bit sneezy and I have red wine, it definitely gets worse.
Yeah,
100%.
Would absolutely. And here's another classic little bit of statistic out of this I found very interesting, is that histamines are very closely linked to migraines. And what they tested was that in migraine sufferers, they tested the enzyme breaking activity, the DAO levels in the gut, and they found that 90% was low in migraine sufferers.
It's funny, because we've mentioned migraines a few times, actually almost every week over the last few weeks.
Oh, it pops up in everywhere.
Doesn't it?
Well, it affects 18% of women and 6% of men. It's huge. I think we're going to do a podcast on it down the track. It's massive.
Yeah.
But just that alone, histamine causing, the cause of a migraine is so varied that it could be as simple as histamine.
Yeah.
And people have horrendous, it's a horrendous burden. They get them every day and they can't work and they're off work and they're depressed. And, we talk about the cluster headaches called the suicide headaches. They kill themselves. I mean, if it's histamine, imagine, because 90% of migraine sufferers have this histamine problem. Imagine if we could look at just clearing the gut out and getting their histamine levels reasonable. I mean, would it improve migraines? I'm sure it would, some of them. I don't know how many, but it'd be huge.
And it'll definitely also help to heal leaky gut as well, because as you mentioned, Steve, earlier, the point of histamine is to make blood vessels leaky, right?
Yes.
To allow that swelling and the fluid and the immune cells. It does the same in the gut.
Yeah.
It creates like a leaky gut barrier as well, which then can allow things to cross into the bloodstream that it shouldn't. And one of the things I want to point out as well, there was a very interesting study that I read on gluten intolerance.
Right.
And I found that, that there'd be people with celiac, I think this was specific celiac disease, if I remember correctly. And a lot of, like 2/3 of people improved when they stopped eating gluten, but there was 1/3 of people who didn't. And when they looked at those third, and they put that third of people who didn't respond well or didn't get better on just going gluten-free, when they put them on a low histamine diet, they all improved.
Wow.
So they found that, I guess, for people who are gluten intolerant or celiac and they don't get a complete recovery or complete improvement of their symptoms, even after going completely gluten-free, they definitely want to look at maybe a histamine component in why they are not getting better.
Okay.
I got another wild study here, and this is from urticaria, which is like a weird rash that no one knows where it comes from.
Urticaria.
Urticaria, yeah.
Okay.
It's just a skin condition. They don't know what causes it. It's like a rednessy thing. They gave these people DAO supplementation, which I'd never heard of, and DAO is the enzyme that breaks down histamine. They gave it to them, and they found that it dramatically improved the symptoms of urticaria.
Wow.
So, I mean, we're starting to figure out that all these weird things are histamine related. Migraines, urticaria. I mean, it's really, you mentioned the gut, of course, and all that, but I mean, isn't that amazing that we may be onto something? Histamine is huge.
Well, I had no idea. And honestly,
I didn't know about that one until this morning.
To be naive, I just really thought that histamine reactions were more to do with the flushing and the puffiness and the running nose and the cats and the pollen. I had no idea it had such an impact.
It even has like a big impact on PMS. I know we're talking a bit more on gut and all of that, but the DAO enzyme that Steve's been talking about plays a huge role in histamine metabolism in the uterus. And it fluctuates with the woman's cycle. So in the first 2 weeks of her cycle, DAO enzyme tends to be much higher, so there's more histamine breakdown. And in the 2 weeks just before her cycle, DAO enzyme function slows down and histamine starts to build up. And the reason why that happens is because histamine stimulates contractions. That's why you get, from an IBS point of view, the stomach cramps.
Right.
From a uterus point of view, you get the uterine cramps if there's too much histamine. So you need that histamine to stimulate the uterus but if there's too much, then you get the period pain, the severe period pain kind of thing.
Gosh.
So we found that even improving histamine symptoms in the gut can sometimes have major improvements in PMS symptoms.
Gee, that a lot of women would be very, very excited to hear that.
Incredible.
So, yeah.
There's also now links between histamine and multiple sclerosis.
Really?
Yeah, incredible, isn't it? And there's still early research, but they're finding that maybe the low DAO stuff in the gut, and we'll talk about how to improve that, by the way. We can do that with natural medicines, but low of that can equal MS as well.
Wow.
Which is like, okay, it may not be the only cause, but it could be one, and it could improve people's lives dramatically.
Parkinson's is another one.
Yeah.
They found that in the brain, mast cells become embedded in the neurons, in the nervous neurons, in the histaminergic neurons.
Okay.
The substantia nigra neurons, and then they start affecting or interfering with the creating massive inflammation with those neurons.
Wow.
Yeah.
So there you go. I mean, MS, Parkinson's, these are serious. And histamine. It's sure. We think of it as a runny nose. But there's way more to it.
Way more.
I mean, just incredible. And it's fine. I was just reading on with this study earlier, and they found that people that have migraines, most of them suffer bloating. And it's like, is there some link in that? It's the histamine and that. There could be a strong link there. Could be
even like the foods that they eat. I think if people who suffer from migraines, if they start to keep a food diary, they may actually find that there would be certain foods that's triggering that migraine,
like
and they may find that it's high
red
histamine.
Wine.
Yeah, I mean, and look, those two things go beautifully together, right?
Yes, they
but
do.
Red wine, cheese. Anything else that you would recommend that people stay away from as far as food
I think you mentioned the fermented foods. Unfortunately, because
kimchi
they're aged,
and all that sort of stuff.
they can be healthy.
Yeah,
but they can be.
If you've got an issue,
you haven't got enough of the good bugs and that. You're in trouble.
Okay.
Yeah.
So ultimately, a lot of healthy foods are high histamine. And so my approach would still be like, initially, sure, reduce your histamine intake food and you'll feel better. But then what you want to do is you want to find out why am I not processing histamine efficiently? Is it because I have gut bugs that are producing histamine, and so I have too much histamine in my gut? Is it because my DAO enzyme is not working well? Is it because I'm taking medications that's interfering with my ability to break down histamine? Is it because I have too much estrogen that's then creating more histamine release? There's so many factors, but you want to get behind that so that if you fix that, maybe your mast cells are just not stable, or whatever. If you fix that, then you should be able to tolerate a lot more histamine foods, and especially healthy histamine foods. You probably don't want to be able to tolerate. It's not about tolerating more alcohol, but it's able to drink your kombucha or eat your sauerkraut or have some cheese every now and then, or what have you. Right?
It's amazing because you talked about estrogen before, and it's funny, the conditions I've mentioned, the MSs and the migraines, etc., they are predominantly in women.
Yeah.
At a rate of 3 to 1. So is there a link between higher estrogen, those conditions, and histamine? It's like, how do you know? It's like, it's quite incredible.
And is that coming from the gut, kind of thing?
The gut, we've got the estrobolome in the gut, which can make more estrogen. So again, it'll if you look at the web of these diseases, they'll drift back towards the microbiome in the gut. And it's incredible. There's a really strong link there.
Yeah.
So I think it's a fascinating area, and it's sort of juvenile with the research now. Like there is a fair bit of research out of it, but what Elizabeth's doing with these great workbooks and stuff, that this is going to change people's lives. So it's a game changer. This so consider this if you're listening out there and this sounds a little bit like you. You've got gut issues and you've got other issues. Consider histamine.
So, Elizabeth, you've been working on a workbook. In fact, you've been squirreled away. It's been hard to get a hold of you because you've been feverishly working with Dr. Ben Lynch as well too. So do you want to mention your workbook, what you've been looking at? Because this is part of the research that you've been doing recently, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So and we are in the process of a second one, but the one that that has been released, that's a histamine workbook that I co-wrote with a researcher called Angela Archer and Dr. Ben Lynch. And it's essentially a workbook that really looks at the signs and symptoms of histamine in all the systems of the body. It looks at the genetics involved there, and it looks at what could be causing those the histamine symptoms. And in a way, it's a workbook that people can tick boxes and like, okay, do I actually have a problem with histamine? And if I do, is it because of this, or this, or is it because of my genetics? And you can kind of like figure out whether you have histamine issues, and if you do, where is it coming from? And then what do I do about it, right? So it's got the solutions in there, but it's also got helps you to identify if this is your problem and where is it coming from. Yep. So it's not necessarily a workbook for people with, there's a lot of people with mast cell activation syndrome who are very on top of the research and all of that. This is probably more a workbook for people who are still, getting into the histamine game, or more for people with histamine intolerance. But it's designed for people to help identify their issues and then find solutions for those issues. Right. So that book was released in January. It's available as a hard copy. For people outside of the US, because that's kind of like where it's being sold out of. For people outside of the US, there is a downloadable version as well. If you didn't want to pay the postage to get a hard copy, sort of like sent to you. Yep. So can I say it?
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. So if you go to seekinghealth.com, that's the website where you can find the histamine workbook, and there should be a downloadable version on there as well for people who rather want to get that.
Yeah. So seekinghealth.com. Products, Dirty Genes, the Histamine Workbook.
That's right, Dirty Genes, the Histamine Workbook.
I like it.
I love the title too. I remember the original book, the Dirty Genes one. That was good.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. It's great. It's great. So
I remember Ben didn't want to say Dirty Genes. He wanted a different title, didn't he? He was saying at one of the talks.
Maybe, yeah. I think he was. I know he also had a few different covers that he was playing around with. And I think initially there was I could be wrong, but I think initially there was a brown poopy symbol, and then it was like,
it ended up green, didn't it? Because I got the
yeah. So
it's great. Did you have fun writing it?
The workbook, it was immense fun.
Yeah,
I'm having lots of fun with this as well because it's geeking out in everything histamine.
Yeah,
looking at histamine in the brain, histamine in fertility, histamine in PMS, histamine in skin, histamine in lungs. It's just and really delving down into mast cell activation syndrome. And
we certainly are a subject matter expert, Elisma, and it's really great to have you on the podcast. So if you're interested to obviously have a look at that workbook, have a look. This might have created some questions for you as well too. So if you've got some questions, please don't hesitate to jump onto and email us at info@atpscience.com. You can ask some questions, or you can jump on and talk to the guys on live chat, and we'll read out your questions on the podcast. So that'll be lots of fun. Guys, anything in closing, or do you think that we've covered off everything?
I think we've covered. I've learned a lot just from this podcast.
Yeah, it's been great. It's been fascinating. It's way bigger than what I thought it was.
It's huge.
So, excellent. All right. Well, thanks, guys, and thanks, Elisma.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you back, and we'll be back next week with some more.
Awesome. Bye.
Right, it's time for that time of the week. It's Australiana time. Now, Elisma, how long have you been in Australia for? Because you're from South Africa.
Am I supposed to sound like him?
Yes, you are.
Sounds like
I know who you are.
Well, I have been in Australia for 2023?
Yep.
All right, 23 years.
Oh, there you go, 2000.
So you came in 2000 and you couldn't. Okay, so maths might not be your strong suit.
I forgot what year we're in.
Oh my God. You know what?
I don't keep track of the time or the day or the year.
I don't keep track of the minute detail of what year it is.
Funny.
I mean, like if someone goes, hey, what time is it? Oh my gosh, it's 12, not 11. Like, you know, okay. You know, you can even forget people go, what day is it today? Especially being on holiday. Holly, what do you do, Elizabeth? You're out there in your 1,000-acre farm.
It could be 2025 for all I know.
Oh my gosh, that's funny. That's funny. Okay, so 2023, you've been here for. So I'm going to ask you a question. Now, we typically come up with an Australian word because we've got a lot of listeners who actually listen to us in the United States and from England. And it's funny, even the difference is there. But Steve will know what I'm talking about. And I reckon you will too, because you've been here 23 years, so you would have heard enough of Australians say this word. But and this word can be used a couple of different ways. So if I say that my car's been flogged.
Yes.
What does that mean?
It means that you sold your car.
That I sold my car.
Your car's been flogged, so you've sold your car.
Actually, there's a double meaning here, and that's wrong. That doesn't fit either of them.
Really?
You have to go back to South Africa now. Sorry, you
what
have
does
to.
it mean?
Yeah, they're coming for you. You have to go. So, Steve, if I say this is funny because this is a dual meaning.
Yeah, it is. I know the two meanings.
Okay,
I think.
So, Steve-O,
flogged your car.
I've flogged my car, and my car's been flogged.
All right. If your car's been
so, do you know? You're surprised. You don't know, right?
I think for me that's the same thing.
No, it's completely different.
Okay, I'm going to learn something.
It's an Australian term, so it's not English.
So if I say, Steve, I've flogged my car.
All right. You have driven it harshly.
Yep.
So flogged it. You could flog your four-wheel drive, driving around your property, you could flog it.
Flog it, which means not caring for it, putting the foot down, handbraking.
Doing some wheelie, what is it called? The burnout.
Typically, if you're flogging it, it just means that you're just driving with no due care and you're putting the foot down, right?
Okay.
So,
I didn't
grinding the clutch, whatever. Okay, if I say that my car's been flogged, what does that mean?
It means it's been stolen.
Stolen?
Did you know? You've been here 23 years and you don't know that. Yeah.
Oh, jeez, it's not English, remember? This is
mate,
Australian.
someone's flogged me car. Yeah. Well, I flogged me car. That's fine. If I flogged me car, then the car's there. It's funny. I love the Australian language. It's just like nobody
it's very colourful. I mean, my husband does. He says all these things, and I never know what he's talking about. And he thinks it's hilarious.
Yes, dear. Yes, dear.
Oh, yeah, he's an Aussie. He's like,
He says. I mean, he does the. I make jokes with him because he doesn't even realize he's doing it. But what does he do? He's got this thing where he says, he's like. Wednesday, Tuesday, right? Kind of thing, which I think is hilarious.
Chinese dad's exactly the same.
Wednesday, Tuesday.
Yeah, it's Wednesday. It's Wednesday, actually. No, we don't say that, but it's Wednesday. Yeah, Thursday. Yeah, but it's Friday.
Friday. That's right.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's like,
now you're talking.
Yeah.
Now you're talking my language.
That's Australia, mate.
Yeah.
And that's exactly right. But yes, they do clip their words. And I say they, even though I've been here since 1987 and I'm more Australian now than New Zealand.
And he does I caught him out because I said to him, you do this, and he refused to believe me.
What?
He says that, well, this is typical Australian. You know when you say a sentence and you end it with but?
Yeah.
He does that. Well, every now and then.
Yeah.
And I caught him out and he was like, oh my gosh, I do that.
Say that. Yeah.
Yeah, I do say that. Because, I mean, that's like very Australian.
Very Australian.
It's like, what would be an example?
It's hard.
I'm going to the shop, but, or whatever.
I had a good day, but...
Yeah.
Had a good day. And Australians also end with the inflection at the end as well, too. It's like, isn't that right, Steve-O?
Yeah.
Like, sort of like we come up at the end of the Anyway, that's enough Australiana. I think we've all had enough. But it's just great to have you here being from South Africa. You've been here 23 years and you still don't speak Australian.
No, I'm still learning.
Yeah.
I'll give you one, just a quick one.
Yeah.
It sounds like Dave's a bit of a bogan.
I think so too, but I wouldn't say that to him.
Do you know what that means?
Yeah.
A bogan?
Yeah. What's a bogan mean?
So bogan would be like, I guess, an ochre Australian.
Yeah,
it's like a redneck in America, yeah. We've got a thing here. And look, I grew up here. So people get offended on other people's things. Like, well, I grew up in Logan. And I loved, and I call it, and we've got the Logan Hyperdome.
Yes.
But I always say to Tony, we're going down
it's Bogan Home.
We're going down the Bogan Dome.
Bogan Dome, that's right.
And I said to my mate the other day, I said, we're going down the Bogan Dome. And I said, 2 people may enter, but only 1 person will leave. Could you remember Mad Max Beyond the Bogan Dome? I mean the Thunderdome? Yeah.
Yeah. And we know what those shopping centres look like.
It can be a little bit rough at times.
Yeah.
Actually, to be honest, I think it's actually improved out of sight.
It's huge. It's got some nice stuff in it, yeah.
Anyway, that's enough Australiana. Now, on with the rest of the show. So Matt, our sound engineer.
Yes.
Did that make you sound? I like that. Yeah. Our sound guy. Yeah. In Australia, it's a sound bloke.
Yeah.
The guy that pushes knobs. Yeah. And then also helps with the. Sorry, just telling the truth. I've outed him. But no, I think in terms of, he just said in England they say. I flogged it, meaning I've sold it, but we say flog off.
Yeah, we say flogged off.
Yeah, so if we've flogged something off, that means, that we've sold it.
It just means that I speak Queen English and you guys speak Australiana English.
That's right.
That's all.
Well, it's terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, on the podcast, I behave myself and don't speak Australian, but it must slip out because you don't know the difference between them. You know, what the Queen's English or the King's English.
Well, when I was in the States as well too, and I think I speak reasonably New Zealandy / Australian, so I don't have a particularly strong Australian accent, and I don't have a lot of the sayings as well too. But some of the people over there were killing themselves laughing when just saying stuff like, "Oh, no worries, mate," like just stuff that comes out naturally. They're like, "No worries."
I went to Vegas about 10 years ago for a medical conference, anti-aging conference. And I was talking to the lady there, and she said to me at the end, towards the end, she said, "You don't have to do the accent with me." And I said, "What accent?" She goes, whatever accent you're doing. And I'm going, I'm not doing an accent. And she thought I was faking my Australian to chat her up or something or other. Oh. And I'm going, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
She goes, you're trying to sound like, Mick Dundee. Yeah. And I went, no, that's he's from Australia, so am I. And so I pulled out my license. Oh, it's like...
Like
weird. I thought I was faking. One time I jumped into a taxi, sorry to run on, and the guy said, "Oh, where are you from?" And I go, "Oh, from Australia." He goes, "Oh," and he paused for a bit, and then he goes, Gee, you speak good English for someone from Australia.
Austria? Is that
I don't know what he was thinking.
No, he knows.
It's like, I've been doing it for, 50-something years, you bitwit. No, I didn't say that. It's just funny that they don't know we speak English down here.
I know. Well, really, apparently, if you ask some people, we're actually part of America. So,
That's right. I heard that too.
The flat Earth theory, and that we're made up. We're all actors. Apparently, apparently, people who believe in the flat Earth theory believe that Australia is actually a made up continent, and that we're just actors.
That's pretty cool.
I know, right?
I know.
I'm part of a conspiracy theory.
I'm a thespian. Do you know what that is?
No. What's a thespian or
a thespian?
Yeah.
A thespian.
Thespian.
Careful how you say it.
Thespian.
A thespian who drives a Vespa.
Yeah, a thespian.
A thespian.
Yes.
I have a feeling this is going to be something.
No, it's not.
No,
Okay.
it's real.
It just means you're an artistic person, actor, actress.
Yeah.
They're thespians.
Oh, okay.
I said it to one of the girls down there.
So like Shakespeare would be a thespian.
He wrote plays for thespians. But yes, it's funny. That's very old English. People wouldn't probably use that.
Well, I am old. And
you are.
Round,
very old.
I was mates with Shakespeare. That's how old I am.
That's exactly right, yeah. Anyway, enough of that.